man kills his friend while driving drunk, does 18 days in jail, and goes back on tour. And he's not the only one. From Hollywood mansions to Norwegian forests to Room 100 at the Chelsea Hotel, some of the biggest names in rock music have been linked to deaths, where the punishment never seemed to fit the crime. And in some cases, no punishment came at all. So let's look at these rock stars and the deaths connected to them. On December 8, 1984, a Ford Pantera sports car was speeding down a winding road in Redondo Beach, California. Behind the wheel was Vince Neil, lead singer of Mötley Crüe. Neil, heavily intoxicated, was keen to show off his orange-red 1972 Ford Pantera sports car. In the passenger seat, holding a lap full of newly purchased liquor bottles, was Nicholas Razzle Dingley, the drummer of Finnish glam rock band Hanoi Rocks. Neither of them would make it back to the party in one piece. One of them would not make it back alive. The two bands had been circling each other's orbit for a while. Hanoi Rocks' unquenchable desire for partying had previously brought them into Mötley Crüe's orbit. Razzle vaguely knew Crüe vocalist Vince Neil, and although the two bands were never the closest of friends, they did share an unhealthy appetite for cavalier self-destruction. Hanoi Rocks had arrived in Los Angeles on their first ever US tour. They were a band on the verge of breaking through internationally. They had the look, they had the sound, they had the momentum. It came as little surprise that as soon as the Hanoi Rocks touring machine arrived in LA, Mötley Crüe held an impromptu welcome party for them. The band's lead singer, Michael Monroe, was stuck in his hotel room with an injured ankle. Monroe stayed behind, bored and frustrated, while the rest of the band, Sammy Yaffa, Andy McCoy, Nasty Suicide, and Razzle, embarked on a 3-day binge that would change all of their worlds forever. The party at Vince Neil's 2-bedroom apartment on Redondo Beach was not one of those orgiastic affairs Mötley Crüe was infamous for. It was just a few friends and rock and rollers getting high and drunk. Tommy Lee and Nikki Sixx drifted in and out. Groupies appeared here and there. Vince Neil and his then-wife Beth, who was 7 months pregnant, played the perfect hosts. 3 to 4 days in, the booze ran out. Party supplies dwindled on December 8th. Vince Neil offered to go to the liquor store and invited Razzle to come along. Neil wanted to show him his new set of wheels. The store was only about 4 blocks away. Neil could have walked, but as he later reflected in his own memoir, he'd been partying for 3 straight days, and walking was too much reality to deal with. They made it to the store fine. Neil and Razzle bought hundreds of dollars worth of alcohol and headed back home. Because the car didn't have a back seat, Razzle was holding all the alcohol in his lap, and then it all went wrong. While speeding and driving drunk, Neil lost control of his car and swerved around a stationary fire truck at 65 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour speed zone. His Ford Pantera careered into the path of oncoming traffic. Neil's car was struck by 2 other cars. The driver of one of them, 18-year-old Lisa Hogan, was rushed in a critical condition to the intensive care unit, where she remained in a coma for about a month with a broken arm and 2 broken legs. Brain damage left her liable to psychomotor seizures. Hogan's passenger, 20-year-old Daniel Smithers, suffered a broken leg and some brain damage. Vince Neil escaped serious injury, but Razzle was pronounced dead on arrival at Redondo's South Bay Hospital. He was 24 years old. Almost an hour later, the rest of the Hanoi Rocks crew grew concerned. Andy McCoy and the band's road manager set about retracing their steps. As they drove, they passed a car wreck near Neil's home. Seconds later, with chilling realization dawning, they returned to the scene to find Vince Neil in police custody and Razzle's unconscious body being put into an ambulance. Now, here's where the story takes a turn from tragedy to something else entirely. Vince Neil was taken to a police station where he was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving and vehicular manslaughter, but was then released on bail for $2,500. $2,500 for a man who killed someone driving more than twice the speed limit, with a blood alcohol level nearly twice the legal limit. On the advice of his lawyer, Neil pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 30 days in jail, $2.6 million restitution that came out of the band's liability insurance, and 200 hours of community service. The victims' families agreed to the sentence, with Neil's lawyer arguing the singer could be more productive using his fame to tell his story on the road than by sitting in jail. He didn't even serve the full 30 days. Neil walked out the doors of the jail after 18 days. As he himself put it, that's what Razzle's life, and the permanent health of those other 2 kids was worth according to the judicial system. Decades later, Neil made a startling admission. He told Blender magazine, "I wrote a $2.5 million check for vehicular manslaughter when Razzle died. I should have gone to prison. I definitely deserve to go to prison. But then, in the same interview, he added a caveat that revealed how his time in jail had been anything but punitive. He stated that he did 30 days in jail and got laid and drank beer, because that's the power of cash. And what happened to Hanoi Rocks, the band that was on the cusp of stardom? Hanoi Rocks canceled the remaining dates on their US tour, played a pair of shows in their hometown of Helsinki with the Clash's Terry Chimes on drums, and broke up in summer 1985 following a short tour of Poland. The death of Razzle did not just take a life. It took a band's entire future. Meanwhile, Mötley Crüe went back to the studio. Sessions for the Theater of Pain album began after Neil completed his time in rehab. The machine rolled on, uninterrupted. Andy McCoy, Hanoi Rocks guitarist, never forgave Neil. McCoy later fumed that Neil sat one night in jail, got away with a misdemeanor, adding if he would have been a broke Afro-American guy or Latino, he would have been doing life in San Quentin. And then there was the matter of remorse, or the lack of it. At the heart of McCoy's bitterness lies what he calls an unforgivable lack of contrition. He never apologized. McCoy noted that the other Mötley Crüe guys apologized, but the other guys didn't do anything wrong. 18 days in jail, a $2.5 million check, and back to the stage. One life over, 2 others permanently damaged, and the man responsible carrying on as if it were just another chapter in the Mötley Crüe story. Room 100 at the Chelsea Hotel in New York City. If the walls of that room could talk, what they would describe from the night of October 11th, 1978, would be the subject of debate for the next 5 decades. On October 12, 1978, Nancy Spungen's body was found under the wash basin in the bathroom of room 100 at the Hotel Chelsea. She had suffered a stab wound to the abdomen. Sid Vicious owned the knife that inflicted the injury, a Jaguar Wilderness K11 with a 5-inch blade. Sid Vicious, born John Simon Ritchie, was the bassist of the Sex Pistols, the band that had essentially detonated punk rock across the United Kingdom and the world. Vicious was drafted into the band in 1977. That he couldn't actually play bass was not seen as a problem. He wasn't in the Pistols because they needed his incredible musicianship. He was there because he gave the band attitude. Nancy Spungen was a troubled young woman from a middle-class family in the Philadelphia suburbs. Born and raised in Philadelphia, Spungen was an emotionally disturbed child who was diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 15. After being expelled from college, she moved to New York City and became a stripper. Known for being a groupie, she flew to London in December 1976, at the height of the punk rock movement, where she became involved with Vicious. Spungen originally tried to ingratiate herself with Johnny Rotten when she first encountered the band. When he shunned her affections, she turned her attention to the striking-looking bass player. Vicious and Spungen soon fell for each other. It would prove a match made in hell. Their relationship was tumultuous, characterized by domestic violence, substance abuse, and heroin addiction. The other members of the Sex Pistols could barely tolerate Spungen. They even went so far as to ban her from their forthcoming 1978 tour of the States. But Vicious was consumed by her. After the Pistols broke up in January 1978 following a disastrous U.S. tour, Sid and Nancy drifted to New York. In January 1978, following the breakup of the Sex Pistols, Spungen and Vicious relocated to New York City where they lived in room 100 at the Hotel Chelsea. The Chelsea was famous for its artistic legacy. Bob Dylan, Janis Joplin, Iggy Pop, Jimi Hendrix, Jackson Pollock, all had passed through its doors. But for Sid and Nancy, it was a place to disappear into their addictions. There they carried on their out-of-control lifestyle of heavy drug abuse, partying, furious arguments, and domestic violence. All sorts of unsavory characters could be seen coming in and out of room 100. For the 3 chaotic months the couple lived at the Chelsea, the night of October 11th was, by all accounts, messy even by their standards. Vicious downed at least 30 Tuinal tablets. Tuinal is a strong barbiturate, and witnesses who were present that evening say the tablets knocked Vicious out cold. That dosage alone would put most people into a state of deep unconsciousness for hours. According to New York Magazine, at 2:30 a.m., Spungen asked Rockets Redglare, a sometimes bodyguard for Vicious who also sold drugs, to get some Dilaudids, an opioid painkiller. Around 7:30 a.m., female moans were heard from the room by other hotel guests. At 10 a.m., Vicious called down to the front desk asking for help. Nancy Spungen, who had been stabbed in the stomach with a knife, bled to death on the bathroom floor. When officers arrived, they found the 20-year-old lying dead on the bathroom floor of room 100, with a single wound to her abdomen. Vicious, just 21 at the time, was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. During his initial interview, he confessed to the crime, but later retracted this confession. Vicious initially declared, "I did it because I'm a dirty dog," before retracting his statement, saying he had been asleep when it happened. The case never went to trial. Only 4 months later, in February 1979, Vicious himself was found dead of a heroin overdose. Sid was dead at age 21. Shortly after Vicious's death, NYPD decided to close the case. As far as they were concerned, Sid Vicious had murdered his girlfriend on the evening of the 12th of October 1978 with a hunting knife. Case closed. But was it really that simple? The decades since have produced competing theories that refuse to die. There are other theories, such as an intruder, potentially a drug dealer or thief, murdering Spungen, or even the possibility that she stabbed herself. Drug dealer Rockets Redglare reportedly admitted to the murder while drinking in CBGBs shortly after, but there was no substantial evidence to back up his claims. An alternative case was made by Phil Strongman, arguing that Rockets Redglare could be the true culprit, stabbing Spungen after she confronted him about his stealing from Vicious. Redglare was heard boasting openly about committing the murder to fellow revelers at CBGBs, and it's true that cash was certainly lifted from Vicious's room that night. The Sex Pistols' own manager, Malcolm McLaren, never believed Vicious did it. McLaren wrote, "Sid was capable of a wide range of self-destructive acts, but I didn't think that he could kill someone, especially his girlfriend, unless it was a botched double suicide. I don't believe Sid killed Nancy." Vicious' mother, Anne, claimed her son and Spungen had entered into a suicide pact, and that Nancy had in fact killed herself. Anne claimed to have found a note from her son shortly after he was cremated, telling her that he was living up to his side of the bargain by dying, and that he should be buried next to Spungen. Vicious was charged with her second-degree murder, but died of a heroin overdose while on bail before the case could be brought to trial. Various authors and filmmakers have speculated about Vicious's role in Spungen's death, and the possibility that she was killed by a drug dealer who frequently visited their room. The punk rocker was never tried for the murder of Nancy Spungen. No conviction, no acquittal, no closure, just a dead woman, a dead suspect, and Room 100 becoming one of rock's most haunted addresses. Whether Sid killed Nancy or someone else did, the case remains open in the court of public opinion, frozen in time the moment Vicious's heart stopped beating in February 1979. Phil Spector changed music. That is not up for debate. Spector rose to prominence in the music industry in the 1960s. He had enormous success as a songwriter and producer, and pioneered a production technique known as the wall of sound. He also developed a reputation as an eccentric, with a bad temper and a fascination with guns. Spector was a world-renowned music producer who became a self-made millionaire by age 21. Among his many successes, he produced music for the Ronettes, Ike and Tina Turner, and George Harrison and John Lennon's solo albums. He was the man behind hits like "Da-Doo, Ron Ron," and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989. But there was another side to Phil Spector, a side that people in the music industry knew about for decades but chose to look the other way on. According to the prosecution, Spector had previously pulled a gun on 4 women. In each case, he had been drinking and was romantically interested in the woman, but grew angry after the woman spurned him. The prosecution alleged that on each occasion, he pointed a gun at the woman to prevent her from walking out. This pattern of behavior, the drinking, the rejection, the gun, would eventually culminate in the night of February 3, 2003. Lana Clarkson was a 40-year-old actress who appeared in films like Barbarian Queen and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. She was working as a hostess at the House of Blues in Los Angeles. When Spector paid a visit to the club, Clarkson didn't know who Spector was. When he approached, he said, "Don't you know who I am? I'm Phil Spector." She, not realizing, stated, "Well, Miss Spector, you can't come in." She thought he was a female. That didn't go over too well. When a security guard informed her that Spector was a celebrity and that she should treat him like gold, she apologized and let him in. They left the House of Blues in Spector's limousine and drove to his mansion. Spector and Clarkson went inside while his driver waited outside in the car. About an hour later, the driver heard a gunshot. Before Spector exited his house through the back door with a gun, he was quoted as saying, "I think I just shot her." Clarkson, 40, was found dead, slumped in a chair in the foyer of Spector's Alhambra, California, Manchin with a gunshot wound through the roof of her mouth in February 2003. From the beginning, Spector's defense was audacious. Spector later said Clarkson's death was an accidental suicide and that she kissed the gun. He told police he didn't know where she got the gun from, claiming she started waving it around. His defense attorneys argued at trial that Clarkson was depressed about her failing career and had taken her own life, but the prosecution dismantled this claim methodically. The prosecution painted Spector as a violent man who needed to control women. They claimed Spector became enraged when Clarkson tried to leave the home and shot her. Prosecution witnesses painted Spector as a gun-toting menace. 5 women took the stand and testified that he had threatened them with firearms. His driver testified that he heard a loud noise and saw the producer leave the home, pistol in hand, saying, "I think I killed somebody." The forensic evidence added another layer of complexity. The bullet was in a downward angle. "If you committed suicide, are you going to point the gun downward?" said the lead homicide detective. "It'd be level or maybe even an upward angle." In closing arguments at the retrial, prosecutor Truk Du called Spector a very dangerous man who has a history of playing Russian roulette with women. 6 women. Lana just happened to be the 6th. Spector's first murder trial in 2007 ended in a mistrial, as jurors said they couldn't reach a verdict after 15 days of deliberations. Jurors were deadlocked 10-2 in favor of conviction. Spector walked free, temporarily. He was tried again for second-degree murder beginning on October 20, 2008. On April 13, 2009, the jury found Spector guilty of murdering Clarkson. On May 29, 2009, he was sentenced to 19 years to life in state prison. Spector died in a prison hospital in January 2021. Phil Spector did not get away with it in the end, but the fact remains that for 6 years between the murder and the conviction, Phil Spector was a free man. He almost got away with it. That first trial, the hung jury, the mistrial, was a razor's edge. 2 more jurors and he could have walked permanently. The wealth, the fame, the legal team, they very nearly worked. And for decades before the killing, his pattern of threatening women with guns went unchecked. No charges, no consequences. Until Lana Clarkson, the 6th woman, became the one who could no longer walk out the door. Keith Moon of The Who was many things, wildly talented, recklessly chaotic, and perpetually unpredictable. But on the night of January 4, 1970, he became something he never expected to be. He became the man behind the wheel when his own bodyguard was killed. On the eve of January 4, 1970, The Who drummer Keith Moon, his wife Kim, his driver Neil Boland, and several friends attended the opening of the Red Lion pub in Hatfield, Hertfordshire. Also in attendance were working-class locals and skinheads, who were offended by Moon's rock star status and display of wealth. As the night wore on, tensions mounted, and Moon's party was driven out of the pub. When they tried to leave, their Bentley was surrounded and pelted with coins. The scene escalated fast. A mob of angry locals encircled the car. Neil Boland exited the car in an attempt to calm the crowd and create a path for the party to get away. A terrified Moon, who was not the best of drivers even when sober, took the wheel, and the Bentley sped off. It wasn't until the car reached the end of the driveway that they realized Boland was under the car with his skull crushed. Neil Boland was dead, killed by the car driven by the man he was employed to protect. Moon was charged with drunk driving, driving without a license, and driving without insurance. But crucially, the murder charge never stuck. Despite Moon pleading guilty to drunk driving, driving without a license, and driving without insurance, all 3 charges were dropped. The judge told Moon, "You had no choice but to act the way you did, and no moral culpability is attached to you." Moon, haunted by the event for the rest of his life, was acquitted of any charges, and Boland's death was ruled a tragic accident. Those who knew Moon said the incident broke something inside him that was never repaired. The nightmares came regularly. The guilt was corrosive. Moon was already a man who drank and took pills at a pace that alarmed even the most hardened members of the rock world. But after Boland's death, the self-destruction intensified. In 1978, Moon died aged 32 years old after swallowing 32 clomethazole tablets, which are used for treating alcohol withdrawal symptoms. Some say the ghost of that night at the Red Lion pub chased him for those 8 remaining years and finally caught up. The question that lingers is this: did Keith Moon get away with it? The court said yes, there was no moral culpability. But Moon himself seemed to reject that verdict. He lived the rest of his life as if he were serving a sentence, just one imposed by his own conscience rather than any judge. The pills and the alcohol became his prison, and the 8 years between Bolan's death and his own were a slow-motion disintegration. Not all the rock stars connected to murders were from the glitzy world of Los Angeles or London's punk scene. Some came from places darker and colder, literally and figuratively. While goth and emo music are obsessed with death, Norwegian black metal is a whole other story. In the early 90s, Norwegian metal bands dressed in corpse paint and went to extremes to project a violent, nihilistic image, which included burning down historic churches throughout the country. Most famous among these was Euronymous of the band Mayhem. One of Euronymous' more notorious acts was coming across the corpse of his bandmate Dead, who had just committed suicide. Instead of notifying authorities, it's rumored Euronymous went to the store to buy a disposable camera, posed Dead's body, and took photos of it, one of which later showed up on the cover of a Mayhem live release. This was the world Varg Vikernes inhabited. Fellow Norwegian black metal musician Varg Vikernes, who performed under the name Burzum, started feuding with Euronymous, which ended when he showed up at Euronymous' apartment and murdered him. In 1994, Vikernes was sentenced to 21 years in prison for charges like first-degree murder, several arsons, and the theft of explosives. In 2009, he was released and moved to France with his family, where he continued to spread extremist ideologies. 21 years was Norway's maximum sentence at the time. Vikernes served 15 of them. After his release, he faced no further legal restrictions. Despite his continued propagation of white supremacist and neo-pagan extremist views, he simply moved to rural France and started a YouTube channel. A convicted murderer and church arsonist, free and broadcasting. Meanwhile, within the Norwegian black metal scene, there was another killing even more chilling in its circumstances. Bård Guldvik Athon, better known as Faust, was a drummer for the Norwegian black metal band Emperor. But in August 1992, a year after the band was formed, his career took a dark swing. While in Lillehammer, Faust met Magna Andreasen, who allegedly flirted with him. The drummer went with Andreasen to the woods. There, Faust stabbed him to death. In later interviews, Faust insisted he wasn't motivated by homophobia. Instead, he described this slaying as an impulse killing. After admitting to his guilt, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison in 1994. He was released well before serving the full term, and afterward returned to music, performing, and recording with various black metal projects. For many, the fact that a self-described impulse killer was able to re-enter society and re-enter the music industry sits uncomfortably. And then there's Bertrand Cantat. Cantat, frontman for rock band Noir Désir, was a major figure in French music in the 90s. Think of a band like Nirvana. Noir Désir was that for French rock music. The band sold millions of copies and even found success internationally. Cantat became an icon in French music, but in 2003, while visiting Lithuania, Cantat got into a fight with his mistress, Marie Trintignant. While Cantat claimed he slapped her 4 times and then put her to bed, medical examiners quickly found Trintignant had actually been struck over a dozen times. Trintignant went into a coma and later died from the assault. The post-mortem suggested that Cantat had inflicted 19 blows to Trintignant's head, causing irreversible brain damage. 19 blows, not 4 slaps, 19 blows. Cantat was charged in Lithuanian courts with murder and was found guilty. However, he was only given a sentence of 8 years and allowed to serve it in France. Then he only served half of his sentence before being released in 2007. 4 years. That's what Cantat served for beating a woman to death with 19 blows to the head. And the story didn't end there. 3 years after his release, Cantat's ex-wife, Christina Roddy, who had supported Cantat during the trial, took her own life after months of suspected abuse from the musician. However, authorities didn't press charges. 1 convicted killing, 1 suicide with suspected abuse behind it, and Bertrand Cantat walked free both times. He even attempted to return to performing, sparking massive protests across France. So here we are at the end of a very dark journey through rock and roll's bloodiest chapters. The question posed at the start was simple. Did these rock stars get away with murder? The answer is not as clean as a yes or a no. It depends on which rock star you're talking about and how you define getting away with it. Vince Neil killed Razzle while driving drunk. He was only given a 30-day jail sentence for the incident and got released 10 days early for good behavior. He paid a financial settlement. He went back to making records. he went back to playing stadiums. He even got arrested for DUI again years later. By any measure of accountability, Vince Neil got away with it. He'll tell you that himself. He said, "I should have gone to prison. I definitely deserve to go to prison. But I did 30 days in jail and got laid and drank beer because that's the power of cash." Sid Vicious was never tried. The punk rocker was never tried for the murder of Nancy Spungen. Whether he did it or not remains one of punk's great unanswered questions. To this day, the incident is shrouded in mystery, with conflicting reports of the night in existence. If he did kill her, he got away with it, albeit only for 4 months before his own death. If he didn't, then the real killer has been walking free for nearly 50 years. Phil Spector did face justice, eventually. In 2009, Spector was convicted of the Feb 3, 2003 murder of aspiring actress Lana Clarkson. But for 6 years between the murder and the final verdict, he lived freely in his mansion. And the decades of threatening women with guns before that fatal night? No consequences at all. His first trial ended in a hung jury. Jurors were deadlocked 10-2 in favor of conviction. 2 votes the other way, and he might have walked permanently. Wealth and fame very nearly did their job. Keith Moon was cleared by the courts, but not by his own conscience. The judge told Moon you had no choice but to act the way you did, and no moral culpability is attached to you. Legally, he got away with it. Emotionally, he did not. The nightmares followed him to the grave. Varg Vikernes served 15 years for murder and arson and walked free. Faust served a fraction of 14 years for stabbing a stranger in the woods and returned to making music. Bertrand Cantat served half of an 8-year sentence for beating a woman to death. The pattern that emerges is unmistakable. When you're famous, when you're wealthy, when you generate revenue for an industry, the system bends. Not always enough to let you off completely, but enough to make the punishment look, to most people, like a joke. 18 days for a death by drunk driving. 4 years for 19 blows to a woman's head. 0 trial for a stabbing in a hotel room when the suspect conveniently dies before the court date. Rock and roll has always celebrated excess, rebellion, and living on the edge. But there's a line between mythology and reality, and that line is drawn in the lives that were lost. Razzle, Nancy Spungen, Lana Clarkson, Neil Boland, Marie Trintignant, Magni Andreasen, Euronymous. Real people, not footnotes in a rock biography, not anecdotes in a behind the music special. Real people who died and whose killers in many cases walked free or walked lightly. The rock and roll machine protects its own. It always has. And the question this video asks, did these rock stars get away with murder? The honest answer in most of these cases is yes, or close enough to it that the distinction barely matters.